Dr. Judy showed me these phenomena that she'd uncovered in the evidence, the forensic study.
That was the most fun day.
It was indeed. You know, we sort of joke about this now. That
Andrew, why is that car parked upside down?
That was it. This was it. When she showed me this picture of this car, and I'd never seen this before, I was going, oh my God, you know, this is it. This was a slam dunk. Because we'd seen all the phenomena that John Hutchison had created. We'd seen the jellified metal, in other words, in the beams in the World Trade Center, which had been stored by, is it WJ that have got that steel? It is, isn't it?
I believe so.
Yeah, it's a company that's held some of the steel fragments. We'd seen this other famous picture that's meant to be a thermite evidence, and it's not. It's called is it the meteor or the meteorite? Is it? They call it.
Yeah.
Lump. That was all fused metal, fused material, fused filing cabinet. That was all fused together, and this is exactly what John Hutchison has done. He's fused metal and wood. You know, there's no way you can get a lump of wood inside the solid block of aluminium, except if you're John Hutchison. You can't fake that. We'd got the upside-down cars, which were these police cars.
Round holes in windows.
The round holes in the windows. We'd got reports of witnesses being levitated, David Hansher being one. We'd got these ongoing effects. In other words, you know, if you go down that page, the WTC page, you'll basically see all these effects catalogued in the evidence at the World Trade Center, and it's a one-to-one match. And again, the cars that mentioned earlier on. I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about those in terms of the distance, that were from the World Trade Center.
Yeah, they're a quarter of a mile, half mile.
Right, yeah. Because you can actually see still photographs of, as you were saying earlier on, cars where the front half of it is completely and utterly destroyed, and the back half of it's still shiny. Yep. And I believe the shot that I was looking at was a police car.
Right.
And there's a clear delineation mark between the damaged area and the undamaged area. Now, anybody who's ever seen a car on fire knows that they tend to burn themselves to the ground, essentially. And if the front end's on being damaged sufficiently for there be no tyre left on the rim, the back end generally shows signs of wear and tear by then as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, unless of course, maybe some pictures will be posted by the trolls that will show a car that's only half burned. Well, probably the explanation for that they wouldn't add was that car fire was put out with an extinguisher, or something. So, that this is the sort of evidence and argument you'll get. But I think the whole idea of the heat phenomenon, that's another of the keys, because the idea was that the towers were the steel was melted by thermite, but from the evidence that Dr. Judy had collected over and over and over again, it looks like heat. But then right next to that, you'll see there's evidence of no heat. You'll see that in the car, the upholstery's not burnt.
Yeah. There's any amount of anomalies with all this, isn't there, basically, that require explanation. Going on, we were talking about Tesla and the various things to do with alternative energy earlier on. There's the issue of Hurricane Erin in the vicinity at the same time as well. I find this, I had no idea about this, and I was absolutely incredulous when I first came across it, but would you like to explain a little bit about Hurricane Erin?
It was interesting. I was on a radio show recently, and a caller called in and called me a liar, and the host was, kind of thinking I was a liar. Like, wait a minute, you look at my website, there's lots of links there. It is pretty peculiar, but it was for 4 days straight. This hurricane was aiming directly towards New York City. And at 8 a.m., it was about the closest to New York City. It was right outside of town. Had the outer bands of the hurricane over the tip of Long Island. It was raining on Cape Cod. Things stopped, turned around, and that afternoon headed out of town.
Did it abrupt about turn?
Pardon me?
You mean the entire hurricane did an abrupt about turn?
Yes. Now, there was a high-pressure system throughout, amazingly, the entire continental U.S. that was moving eastward. And so, okay, it was going to maybe keep the thing from coming ashore. They weren't sure. They kept calling it for it to turn north here. Nope, turn north the next day. Nope, turn north. They didn't really seem to have it predicted right as far as the records go.
Right.
But it's, if you have Manhattan full of people stuck on this island that's at sea level, and you have a hurricane coming up, aren't you worried about the storm surge?
Yeah,
not the hurricane hitting town, but if a hurricane stalls outside of town, you have horrendous storm surges that would flood Manhattan.
Exactly. And yet there's virtually no mention of it in the contemporaneous records from the time, is there?
Right. And I've got weather report pictures, 4 different network images at about 8:30 to 8:32 a.m., and that's about 15 minutes before the North Tower got its hole. And so there's no reason to be distracted on anything else. They show the weather map. They show that patch of the ocean where the hurricane should be, but don't show the hurricane. One of them mentions it, but the other ones, it didn't appear in any of the maps.
No, do you think they were maybe worried that it would confuse the issue if there was more than one impending disaster scheduled for that day? I'm just being facetious. You don't have to answer.
Yeah, or people are going to leave town. Well, one thing I wonder is how can you be that sure exactly how long it's going to stay that you don't need to tell anybody?
Yeah, it all sounds a bit peculiar, doesn't it? Can you just clarify for me, my ignorance, the hurricane has some tie into this in the sense that through, I'm not going to use the word half, but essentially that is the assumption somehow that the hurricane was either orchestrated and part of it, or the power source for it, or
that's another misinformation that gets twisted up out there. That is like, the ray beam from space got plugged in. The extension cord was plugged into the hurricane. No. Again, I just look at data. If you listen to the data carefully enough, it'll tell you exactly what happened. If you don't know, keep listening until you do. So I'm looking at the dust, how the dust goes up, and it goes downwind, down the eastern seaboard. I want to get a better picture. So I start looking at satellite images, weather satellite images. What's that? A hurricane? That's how I discovered it.
Right.
It's totally by surprise. And because of how it was there and nobody really was aware of it, it's on the record, but kind of tucked away. Okay. I started looking into what do hurricanes do. And they're, a cyclonic system, the same with a tornado. And got to looking at more characteristics. One thing we know is when a tornado or hurricane's coming, all the birds leave town. They pack up and leave, so you know that a hurricane's coming. There's a kind of a field effect ahead of the hurricane, an electrical field. Right. The same with the tornado. We kind of sense, you can kind of smell a tornado coming. It's not really an odor, but you feel it. Yeah. There's a kind of electrical energy. Well, okay, let's look at the weather data at the various airports. LaGuardia, John F. Kennedy, and Newark airports, the 3 major airports surrounding Manhattan, all reported thunder on 9/11. Now, right. People remember it being nice, crystal clear, blue sky. Why do we have reports of thunder? That is indicative of field effects. Right. What you get ahead of the storm. Okay, so we have this static field. Oh, come to think of it, John Hutchison used to use a Tesla coil, but then went to a Van de Graaff generator to create that static field in which he interferes other radio frequency signals.
Right.
So
a Van de Graaff generator is essentially a small little manufactured version of that same sense you get when there's a thunderstorm coming, essentially, yeah? Mm-hmm. That static electricity buzz in the air, kind of smell it as much as sense it kind of thing,
Mm-hmm. Right. And so, John Hutchison's thing is like, in one room. If you need to supersize it, well, think of what a hurricane looks like. A huge Tesla coil. It, goes round and round and round and round, and, around the stem and up to the top, big plate at the top.
Yeah.
Okay, wrapping wire round and round something, coiling wire, around a metal object gives you, in Cub Scouts, you do this. I don't know what you have in England. You wrap a wire around a nail, plug it into a 9-volt battery, and you've got a magnet.
Right.
You can move magnetic fields, and you get electricity, which is hydroelectric power. Uh-huh. So here we can turn electricity into magnetism, and magnetism into electricity. They interfere, and there's another component, gravity.
Right. Which you can be seen through the Hutchinson effect, yeah.
And there's all these different things going on. Okay, what's the Earth's magnetic field doing? And the data I found was magnetometer readings in Alaska, 6 different stations. And I, like to plot data to get a look at it, and I looked at it, and it's kind of, you get them all like in the average value, and they start to drift down, and then they abruptly, like a chevron pattern, you start, reverse direction, go up. Uh-huh. Turns out, right where they made that reverse direction was the moment the North Tower got its hole.
Right.
And then, all the values start going up, and then they get to a value, and they abruptly go horizontal. That's when the South Tower got its hole.
So there's a clear time correlation between the magnetometer readings and the actual events.
Yeah, not only that, the 9/11 Commission, the NIST report, the FEMA report, and Lamont Doherty seismograph all have slightly different times for when the North Tower got its hole.
Right.
I can tell you which one's right.
I think it'd probably be the one that correlates with the magnetometer reading.
Yeah, the magnetometer is somewhere in the middle of those values, which, within 3 seconds to one side or the other.
That's pretty close, isn't it?
Right. And then what's even stranger is when, suddenly it starts trending down when the South Tower goes poof, and it goes off like over the edge of a cliff when the North Tower goes poof. And then they're haywire all afternoon, and then they get back to almost normal, right, when the Building 7 goes poof.
Right.
And
Building 7's a whole separate issue altogether, because there's a complete absence of aeroplanes involved in that scenario, isn't it? Which is something I wanted to get onto with you later on.
Yeah, it's the same with the other ones. It's okay, I'll stay out of that.
Yeah.
But one thing I would like to is another interesting thing that I noticed is in the North Tower, the airplane hole went from north to south. The South Tower, the hole went from south to north. The 2 towers went away from top to bottom. Building 7 went away from bottom to top. It's like each one is correcting the other one.
Right. I'm not quite sure what to make of that, in all honesty, Dr. Judy. It's
like something gets out of equilibrium, the other thing puts it back.
Right, yeah. A sort of synchronicity between the two. It's swaying backwards and forwards.
What I think we can mention is field effects, because that's what all the evidence is showing is at play. In other words, the field effects from the hurricane. What John Hutchinson was doing is to do with field effects, generating electric and magnetic fields and mixing them together in particular ways to generate certain effects. So, going back to this directed energy weapon, a lot of people think in the traditional sense of a laser being a focused beam of energy, or a microwave, this thing that you mentioned, which is the active denial system that's been used at the prison. Right. That's a microwave beam of some kind, or so I understand, and it's quite a narrow focused beam where its energy is acting in one place. What we're talking about here is it's still directed energy, but it's actually the way that it's being manipulated is rather unconventional. It's actually not. We're probably looking at a mixture of directed energy things being put into a kind of an area. They're being directed into an area around the World Trade Center and potentially at the other sites where things happened as well, at the Pentagon and Shanksville. So
I would like to say the directed part is that it's directed to act on a particular area. Like, why was it just those buildings and not across the street? That's very directional there. But there's an analogy that a student of mine actually came up with when I was trying to describe this to him. He said, I design audio systems. You have to be careful in a particular room where you put the speakers, how you put the speakers.
In other words, if you go down that page, the WTC page, you'll basically see all these effects catalogued in the evidence at the World Trade Center, and it's a one-to-one match. And again, the cars that mentioned earlier on, I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about those in terms of the distance, this was a slam dunk, because we'd seen all the phenomena that John Hutchison had created. We'd seen the jellified metal, in other words, in the beams in the World Trade Center, which had been stored by, is it WJ that have got that steel? It is, isn't it?
I believe so.
Yeah, it's a company that's held some of the steel fragments. We'd seen this the solid block of aluminium, except if you're John Hutchison. You can't fake that. We'd got the upside-down cars, which were these police cars.
Round holes in windows.
The round holes in the windows. We'd got reports of witnesses being levitated, David Hansher being one. We'd got these ongoing effects. This other famous picture that's meant to be a thermite evidence, and it's not. It's called is it the meteor or the meteorite? Is it? They call it?
Yeah.
Lump. That was all fused metal, fused material, fused filing cabinet. That was all fused together, and this is exactly what John Hutchison has done. He's fused metal and wood. There's no way you can get a lump of wood inside. Dr. Judy showed me these phenomena that she'd uncovered in the evidence, the forensic study.
That was the most fun day.
It was indeed. We sort of joke about this now. That
Andrew, why is that car parked upside down?
That was it. This was it. When she showed me this picture of this car, and I'd never seen this before, I was going, oh my God, this is it.